Thank you. Are we on? We just missed the story about Maria online. You said you grabbed the Monet, but why? More valuable and I'm not picking on you, I'm saying in what sense more valuable?
In terms of the source and there's many factors that like monetary value, what people would pay for it,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that that person's not alive anymore and you can't make another one, and
Right.
there's a lot of intense hard work that not many people could create something like this.
Okay.
This one is one that your daughter can make again.
Right.
You can make one with your daughter and create a new memory, or you can do some different things to
Okay.
replace that, but this one is not.
Okay. Malia defenders of the picture, any words that you would say in response? Why would you get her napkin picture of you rather than the Monet? Yeah.
I would just say because like it affects your relationship and your trust with your child rather than
Mm-hmm.
it's yes it has like value to it, but I think value within a relationship is more important because like you could break like it's silly but you could like break your trust with your child that way and it may be something little to you but to them it's
Mm-hmm.
really big. So I think in the long run I think it would be more important to put your child first even though saying something silly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Especially when your child specifically saw you going in for the napkin.
Mm-hmm.
And then for you to come back with something else, they would be like,
Yeah. Mommy, why didn't you get the napkin? You know. Anyone else? What if you run out in the street and you grab the napkin and then the curator of the museum that you bought it from is your next door neighbor? Right? That relationship's going to be strained. Right? How about the community of Monet lovers? You're going to break, their trust too, arguably.
Like, do they have to know?
They don't
Do they have to know? Well, actually, these days Monet's paintings are numbered. We know most of them where they are, right? It does surface what we value and why, right? It's interesting that we immediately went to monetary value, which is not unimportant. I think you were hinting at, but what about the beauty of the Monet compared to the beauty of the little stick drawing, right? It's hugely meaningful and meaningful to the person. I actually have a whole folder at my house of all the little figures that my kids drew for me. My one son, I'm a drummer, he's a drummer, he drew little drum sets while we were out to dinner, and then he would play on them while we were at dinner. Super cute, right? Now he plays math metal, double bass drum. It's really good, right? Which would you get and why, right? Now, at some point, would you be willing to agree that, Mila's going to have to learn, right, when you have to do some things rather than other things for more important reasons, right?
I just wouldn't run into a burning building, period.
That could be the other response, right? Mommy, go get my picture. Do you want me to tie? No, see, I can't. I don't want to risk my life and leave you motherless, right? That could be another response, yeah. What would have I have done? If I could go back in the building, I would grab the Monet. And I would explain to my children that some things are more beautiful than others, and they're worth risking things in life. Now, I agree with Maria that there's certain times where you should choose not to risk your life for such things, right? But notice how we have to weigh those. And notice we're saying that, an individual human life is even more important than that Monet. That's why you grab Mila first, right? Now, you can really make it a little bit more interesting. And what if Mila says, "Get my picture," but the family dog is still in the house?
I'm getting the dog.
You're getting the dog, right? And now, almost everyone I ask in this situation, they get the dog, right? Now, what if you were walking by a river, minding your own business, you're with Mila, and I appreciate your willingness to jump in and everything like that. So, and you're walking the family dog, Mila's there, and you notice a young kid, a stranger, also walking by the river, and all of a sudden, the dog sees them and sort of breaks off the leash and slips and falls into the river. Your immediate reaction, Mila's like, what would we name the dog? George. That's okay. You can name the dog George. We named the dog George. George is in the river. Mila says, Mom, save George. And you're like, yes. You adjust really quick. You make a judgment. I can swim in this. I can do it. But you see the stranger, the kid, fall into the river. And you can't save both.
I'm saving the little kid.
Right. So you choose to save the little kid. But which do you love more? Honestly, you love the dog more, right? No, the dog's going to drown. George is drowning. There's no doubt about it. You miss one, there's rapids ahead. You're not going to save him.
There's too strong of a current for the dog to swim, but
You can swim, right? So now, Maria, why would you save the dog? I mean, sorry, why would you save the stranger over the dog?
because a person's value is more than that of an animal.
Right. You know, I ask most students this today, and a lot of times I'll do it with elementary and also middle school and high school students. It goes 50-50 these days. 50% will save the dog, 50% will save the stranger. Now, I appreciate your answer. Is there a reason behind your answer? Thank you for allowing me to dialogue with you on this.
That's someone's child.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want my child to be in the river, and if
Yeah.
someone had a choice to save their dog or my child, I would rather they save my child.
Right. So you have a certain kind of empathy. What if you were still, like you didn't have a child and you couldn't empathize in that way? Would you? You'd still save the child. And the reason is because,
It's still the same. Like I
Yeah.
would feel like I would.
well, you just don't feel, you think too. Yeah, you think the kid is worth more than the dog, but why? Yeah, the Christian, the Jew and the Christian have a response to that, and that's because that kid there is made in the image of God, and is arguably eternally more valuable than the dog. As much as we love dogs, and maybe dogs do go to heaven, and God restore. I don't know. That's an open question. But I do know from the New Testament and some other reasonings that no, that child is in the image of God. And God calls me to love the stranger, right? Now, I may not have feelings of love for the stranger, you get me? I actually have more feelings for my dog. I actually love, in that sense, I love my dog more. But my love, that means seeking the good of the other, I should seek the good of the kid who's going to drown over and against the dog. Now, I'm going to be hugely sad about the dog. It's going to be devastating. But I'm going to know I did the right thing, right? Does that make sense to you? So you can see how our emotions and our empathy play into how we look at what we value and what's important to us. And even though our emotions play into it, at the end of the day, I would argue it's not completely subjective. It's objective. We should save the kid. It's interesting today that when I ask students, especially younger ones, it's 50-50. They're not growing up with a Judeo-Christian worldview that says, well, that stranger is made in the image of God, right? They actually will save the dog more. There are some statistics that we spend more money in America on pet grooming than we do on disabled children. That could say something. If that statistic is right, that says something about our values. Now, my point here is not to heap judgment or do anything like that. It's to point out value theory is really important, and helping us to figure out why we value things and for what reasons is really, really important. Right? Did I bum you out about the dog drowning and stuff like that? Sorry. But it was George, so yeah. Value theory is incredibly important. Also, that last part I said, metaphysics, epistemology, value theory, but also logic, reasoning. And that's where I want to go today with you for a little bit, and hopefully make it a little bit fun for you. Here's a little roadmap. One of the main things that comes up when we talk about logic and reason is how do reason and faith and reason, work together? Or do they even work together? What does our communities, our culture think? What does the Bible say? What is our own understanding of it? So we'll talk a little bit about faith and reason. Should we get into arguments? What does the Bible have to say about that? Are arguments good? Are arguments bad? How should we approach such things? Actually, the Old Testament, Proverbs, Jesus, Paul has a lot to say about it, actually. What about Jesus himself? You will be surprised, maybe not, hopefully you've heard at least a little bit of this before, but Jesus was actually quite the logician. That is, he was very, very skilled at using logic. And we can actually see that the Savior you follow is really smart. And that's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to know that Jesus, even in his human nature, yes, in his divine nature, he's all-knowing. But remember, Philippians 2 says that he sets that aside when he takes on the human nature, and he lives a truly human life. But we find out that Jesus is really, really smart. And it's fun to actually uncover that. And then I want to draw some application, okay? So that's our roadmap over the next few minutes that we gather together, all right? So let's first talk about this idea of reason and faith. Now, I don't want to do this to you. It would be easy for me to just spill a lot of information where 80% goes right by you, and I could say, yeah, I'll give you the PowerPoint later. But I'm going to kind of give you the big picture, some of the contours of it. If you want to go deeper, then just ask me questions, stop me. If you have a different opinion or you want to take a different position, just let me know and jump right in. There's an interesting passage in 2 Peter. He puts it this way. He says, therefore, I will always be ready to remind you of these things. He had just been talking about growing in the faith, both morally, spiritually. He says, even though you already know them. Now, those of you who are like psychology, he has a very distinctive psychology here. If you know something, do you need to be reminded of it? Can you think of an example? Where you know something, but you have to be reminded of it.
I know I have to wake up in the morning and I have to be reminded.
Yeah, you use your alarm. Yeah. Did anyone's parents tell them, pick up your towel? Remind them? Yeah, at least my parents did. Yeah, Ezra.
Like I know that my parents love me, but they still, like, I feel like sometimes it's not to remind me.
Yeah.
I think otherwise at times.
Yeah, in our relationships, we remind people of the status of our relationship, right? Our parents remind us that, hey, just want to let you know, I called, want to tell you I love you, and it's good to hear, right? So it's interesting that we can know things that we're not thinking about, and then reminding puts it back in the front of our consciousness. And it can be really, really helpful. And as human beings, we need reminding. And Peter says, look, I want to remind you of these things. I'm always ready to, even though you already know them and have been established in the truth, which is which is present with you. Very interesting, right? So you can know the truth, but need to be reminded of it, or you can actually be deepened in it. You can have greater reasons and a deeper understanding of something that you already know. I mean, if you study really, really well for a test, then you have a level of confidence in taking the test. Even if your friend's like, oh, you're going to blow it. You're like, no, I feel good. I'm gonna ace this thing, right? Because I've put the work in. I really understand the math or whatever. He continues, he says, I consider it right, as long as I am in this earthly dwelling, I love this phrase, to stir you up by way of reminder. To stir you up by way of reminder. And I will also be diligent that at any time after my departure, you will be able to recall these things to mind. So he wants to be able, with his community, to remind them and remind them and remind them so that when they're in a situation, they can call the truth back to memory and deal with the situation rightly, right? If you see a burning house or someone fall into a river, you'll think of the analogy that we just went through, the moral dilemma, right? And this is what we do. This is how we train firefighters, police officers, ethicists, is we go through these experiments, thought experiments, so that when we're in that situation, we know how to act. We know how to act, right? That's a part of our training. So what I want to do here with you today is some of these things you will already know, but I'm going to remind you of them so that you have a deeper understanding, hopefully, if I do my job right, and then you can recall them to memory much better, okay? That's my aim. So many people think that reason and faith are bickering brothers. They don't go together. But arguably, the New Testament, even the Old Testament, I would say, it has a picture of reason and faith as partners, as two brothers working together in accord to accomplish a mission, a task together. But I think generally, the culture out there has got the idea that faith and reason have no way of working together. Rather, I think we should see faith and reason almost like a pair of scissors. Some people have used that analogy. If you put the two blades together, lock them together, they're able to cut paper. They work together to accomplish the mission. Faith and reason are similar in this sense. Now, you may remember that, did anyone know nursery rhymes? Right? Remember Humpty Dumpty? Could you sing it? Humpty Dumpty, wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Right? I can see my mom reading it to me back when I was 3. Now, put this in another way. One philosopher put it this way. Faith and reason sat on a wall. Faith and reason had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men, that's the philosophers, the theologians, the apologists, the pastors, all the king's horses and all the king's men faced the challenge of putting faith and reason back together again. And that's part of our job. What I find is that when I talk to people, they think faith is a blind leap. If you ever saw the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, there's a scene in the movie where he's trying to save his father, and Indy comes to a chasm, and there is no bridge. But he's told from a book that he needs to take a leap of faith. And so he closes his eyes, puts out his foot, and there's nothing but a chasm there, and then he puts his foot down on nothing, but there's an invisible bridge. Right? So in one sense, he's called to have blind faith, but he has a testimony in a book that says, no, if you step out, you'll be okay. There's a bridge, right? So faith and reason aren't opposed to one another. I think they're working together with one another. Let me demonstrate. Let me give you an example of how it's portrayed in the culture. Now let's see if someone can help me here, technical-wise, to make sure that the volume is going to work. I'm going to have you watch a video. This is a show called Becker. It was on a number of years ago with a very famous actor, Ted Danson. He was part of Cheers, lots of other shows. And in the show, Becker, played by Ted Danson, Becker is he's a medical doctor with his own practice, okay? But he's kind of a skeptical, obstinate, kind of a grumpy person, but he still cares for his patients and he's a decent doctor. Well, in this particular episode, he is in a partial relationship with this woman who owns a restaurant. And all of a sudden, her name's Chris. Chris has an illness and is thrust into the hospital. And even unbeknownst to him, his empathy, his compassion, he helps Chris get to the hospital. And he gets her into the hospital bed. And the doctors come in, he has to step out, he comes back in, he walks up to her and I can't believe, are you okay? Okay, she's okay. She had an appendicitis. She's doing better, they took care of it. And she looks at him and she touches his cheek. And she says, I love you. She says, I love you. And he can't believe it. It melts his heart. And he says, I can't believe it. Well, I love you. And he can't believe the words are coming out of his mouth. He says, I love you. And then just at that moment, the orderly walks in the door and walks up to Chris, and she looks at the orderly and she says, I love you. And then the nurse walks in, and she looks over at the nurse and she says, I love you. And then she looks over at the IV, and she hugs the IV bottle. She says, I love you. And then the orderly says, once you give them Demerol, pain medication, they love everything. And then they wheel her out. And he's in shock, and he's like, oh no, I just said the 3 biggest words to Chris, I love you, and who knows if she even loves me. So he's like really distraught, and he's afraid all of his coworkers are going to make fun of him. Well, they find out about the situation, and they are super concerned about Chris, who just recovered, but they're making fun of Becker because he said, I love you, but then is going back from it, okay? So that's the setup for the scene you're going to see. And you're going to meet 2 co-workers, Margaret and Chris, and they're going to have a conversation about faith and reason. And I want you to sort of pick out how they view faith and reason, and which one of them actually has a more biblical view of faith and reason. Because Margaret, who you'll meet, is a Baptist, and Linda, who's also the coworker, is an agnostic. Kind of more of like a hedonist, just kind of does what she thinks is fun. All right? So that's the setup. Let's see if this works. Here we go.
Not a very pleasant thing to do.
It looks like it's playing on your desktop, but not right here.
Oh. Is there a way to... Right here. Here's the thing. Sorry for the delay, all.
But I mean, like, is there a way to share with, like, your external monitor, or is that not?
External. Let's see now. That's weird.
That's my message.
I'm not familiar with the.
Usually I don't have any, it'll go through the HDMI. Any tech person know?
Wait. Okay. Now
Yep.
maybe try.
You might have to drag it over to that screen.
Is there a way to do that? Sorry, guys.
So if you were to drag that to the left or to the right, let's try just one.
It's not even letting me do it. No?
Is it there?
And then
Push the square. Anyway.
Okay, so this video here?
Yeah, hit but hit the large screen. There you go. Oh. You're doing a good job. Well, that's
Yeah, wait, there's gotta be a button.
Hit that.
This?
Yeah. No, wait. Hey.
And then this?
oh yeah.
I pushed it twice accidentally. So now play? Or this?
No, hit play in the middle. But no sound.
No sound. Wait. Is there a sound button here?
Yeah.
And sounds on here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You need to switch the speaker selection.
Okay. On the TV?
No, on the laptop
Oh, gotcha.
through settings.
Okay, so you have to send sound out to the HDMI.
Try now.
Well, we'd have to push play on your
Oh, sorry.
thing to do that.
Sorry, guys.
So it sounds like it's playing through these speakers. So what was the thing you were just playing with?
Talk amongst yourselves for a quick second. Sorry. Usually works for me. This and this one.
Yeah, let's try that. The high definition. Yeah.
I love you.
Yep. There he goes.
Did you just say?
I love you.
You know, I've been thinking about you, and I can't get you out of my mind. I've been dreaming about you. Well, I guess this means I think I love you too. No, I do. My God, I love you.
And how we feeling? I love you.
Ready to go?
I love you.
I love you too.
I love you.
One shot at them or they love everything.
All right, I'm going to fast forward it here.
That guy's ever had an empty stomach.
And surviving. I also lost my son Michael, 40.
Had an empty stomach. Okay, what's this antibiotic?
All right, there we go.
That's my message.
Here you'll see Becker with Margaret.
Hey, Mr. Lewis, this antibiotic ought to clear up that infection. Just make sure you don't take it on an empty stomach. Like that guy's ever had an empty stomach. Okay, let's see what we got here.
Do you know how stupid that looks? How many of those do you have in a day?
They're candy cigarettes.
50 or 60.
Do you really think that much sugar is good for you?
Margaret, it's all just a horse race toward death. Emphysema was in the lead. I'm just giving diabetes a chance to catch up. Do me a favor. I want you to call the lab and get Mr. Newman's test results back.
Oh, I'd be happy to, John, because I love you.
Look, if this is about Chris again, I think I've explained that. She knows that I did not mean what I said.
It doesn't matter, John. The words I love you are very powerful to a woman.
Yeah, but not to a man. To a guy. I love you means nothing. It's just a way to get out of trouble, and it's cheaper than flowers, and it gets women into bed. That's all.
I hate it when he's right. Those charts aren't going to file themselves.
What difference does it make? Eventually the patients will die, then you'll die, then I'll die.
Don't be so sure it's going to happen in that order.
I'm sorry, Margaret, but ever since I heard that Chris could have died, all I can think of is that it could have been me. I mean, what's my life about? The endless parties, the clubs, the one-night stands.
Oh, it's all pretty empty, isn't it?
No, it's amazing. But one day it's going to get old, so I have to find some deeper meaning in my life. Like you. You seem to have this inner calm about you
Okay, I'm going to fast forward it a little bit more here.
AFC's barbecue boneless wings. Tangy flavor of barbecue wings.
All right. Here's the talk of faith.
What are you doing? You're in early and you're reading? I don't know which makes less sense.
I'm studying.
The Complete Idiot's Guide to Religion?
There's a spiritual void in my life, Margaret.
I thought that's why you go shopping.
My closet's full, but my soul is empty.
Where'd you get that? My closet's full, but my soul is empty.
That's why I'm checking out different religions. You're a Baptist, right? What do you guys do?
Well, we do charity work, and on Sunday we go to church, we pray.
Pray for what?
Oh, help, guidance, answers.
What questions?
Like, what's my purpose?
To get answers?
Not exactly,
Then why
but
do you pray?
because it makes me feel good.
Yeah, but it could be pointless. For all you know, God's up there going, I wish these people would just shut up and leave me alone.
God wouldn't do that.
Yeah, but how do you know?
Because I have faith.
But you don't really know. What if there is no God and we're all living in this big empty universe?
That is not what I believe.
Yeah, but you don't know.
Yeah, but I feel that
It doesn't matter what you feel, you have no proof, right? Right?
That's right. I have no proof. That's why it's called faith. It goes beyond rational understanding. I believe what I believe because it gives me inner peace.
Wow. So you believe whatever nonsense they tell you, and that makes you happy. That's deep. Thanks, Margaret.
How do I get it back to the other? I can do it this way. Hopefully it'll work. Okay, so what does Linda want? She's the one questioning Margaret. Do you remember what she said? She wants proof. And what does Margaret say? She has faith, but no proof. Right? So what's her view of faith? She said, well, it's beyond rational understanding. So Linda, and do you see the interplay between Margaret's belief, but Linda keeps challenging her, but do you know, right? Remember we talked about the interplay of belief and knowledge, right? Is Linda's question appropriate? Yeah. She's looking for evidence, answers, right? And Margaret, I don't know, what did it feel like to you? Margaret's answer. What was, you didn't like, yeah, can you talk about it a little bit?
I didn't like that she kept saying, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I also didn't like that she couldn't prove her faith.
Mm.
Because faith can be proved.
Yeah, you think that there's evidence to demonstrate, right, your faith. So it's almost like Linda has, the skeptic almost has the more biblical understanding of faith and reason, and Margaret actually has a misunderstanding. You know, it's interesting. I've always wondered what the writers of the show actually thought. Right? Do they actually think that most believers think like Margaret, or do most believers actually think like Linda, but actually have answers that they want to provide? And I think that I think the writers actually think that faith there is no rationality to it at all. But I think that's a deep misunderstanding of faith, and it's an unbiblical understanding. People they're free to have that view. I don't want to negate that, but let's just be clear, that's not the biblical view of faith and reason, right? That they're not opposed. Thought? Oh, I thought you were. So think of it this way. What is faith on a biblical understanding? Right? Were you going to comment?
Oh no, I just got really excited that you put biblical faith and not blind faith, because
Yes.
there's a common misunderstanding that people consider like believing in God and consider it as blind faith.
Yeah. Yeah. What I tend to find is that people think that faith is a way of knowing, and I think that's partially true. Let me try to give you a different model. See if it resonates with you, and then as you go back to the scriptures and check, see if the model that I'm giving you seems to resonate with what you get out of Scripture. So, I think faith is more like this when you read it from a Scripture. Faith is an activity of the will, not necessarily an activity of the mind. So you have to have a deeper understanding of the human soul and the mind and our psychology. Your will is your capacity to trust in something. So you walk into the classroom and you sit down and you put your trust in the chair. You have faith in the chair. The New Testament word for faith, and believing is a part of that, is a way to trust in something. Now, when we trust into something, we do acquire knowledge, right? You sit into the chair and you go, oh, the chair is hard. It can hold me up. Or you might look at it and say, yeah, it's not rickety. It'll hold my weight. It's a well-made chair. So your will is sort of the means of trusting things, right? And you do come to know about something when you put your trust in it, right? If you trust in a new relationship, let's say it's a new friend, you call them up, hey, can you take me to the airport? If they actually show up, you learn something about them, that they're trustworthy. They're worthy of your trust. They're dependable, right? So your will is sort of designed, I would say, it searches for things to put its trust into. It could be the chair. It could be a parent. It could be a friend looking for a spouse, whatever that is. In this case, faith is directed towards our trust in God. And so how does our faith become strengthened so that we will put our trust in God in deeper and deeper ways? So faith, just to repeat now, faith is an activity of the will, I would say. Well, then what is reason? What do you think reason is? It's not so much an activity of the will. Yeah, exactly. It's an activity of the mind. So let me just give a definition. Biblical faith is not blind faith. Now, we do at times put our trust in things that we just don't know a lot about. That's just the practical nature of life, right? You get into your friend's car, you just don't know how well the car is going to run. Is it going to get you somewhere? You know, that's just a matter of our pragmatic things that we have to decide. But biblical faith could be defined this way: as a confident trust in a reliable, reasonable, and viable source. Biblical faith can be defined as a confident trust in a reliable, reasonable, viable source. So God knows that God is reliable. That's not the problem. The problem is, or the journey is, for us to learn in what ways is God trustworthy. And the whole Bible is about that. How can we put our trust in God? So biblical faith can be defined as a confident trust, right? You can trust in something kinda, right? You might see a rickety bridge and you kind of, check it out. But once you find out it's safe, you'll put more trust in it, right? I don't think it's very much different with biblical faith. So reason, as Nolan rightly said, reason is an activity of the mind. It's our capacity, I would say a God-given capacity, for thinking, believing, and deliberating, judging, discerning. It's a means to discover knowledge, right? We're probing our mind probes for knowledge. It starts out with belief. I believe the car can get me to the airport. I believe the chair will hold me. But we want to move to knowledge. And Linda even asked this question. I know you believe, Margaret, but do you know that God is real, that he answers prayers? So, if biblical faith is trust, and we use our reason to build up our trust, then faith and reason go together, even though they're different kinds of things on the biblical account. Some people want to reduce faith to just blind trust. And I think that's a misunderstanding of the biblical notion of this. Any questions or comments or reflections so far on the model here? Is it resonating with you? Does it seem accurate? What does your shirt say? Jesus, get the load. Meaning?
There's no high like the Most High.
Isn't it? Okay. Translation?
I have no idea. I just met like a pastor
Yeah.
from Oahu in a surf shop here.
Yeah.
We happened to talk and he gave me this shirt.
It seems to me that it's actually an example of this is that Jesus, well, you could say could carry the load, right? We can trust him. He's the door, the Gospel of John says, right? The door to walk through for salvation. He's the good shepherd, right? That can protect us. John goes, he's the bread of life, right? He nourishes us in ways that even everyday food, bread, nourishes us. Right? That's a means of trusting him for a lot of provisions. Right? So notice that reason probes for evidence. Linda was probing for evidence in the clip so that you can put your trust or not put your trust in. You don't want to put your trust in unreliable things, but your trust in very reliable things. So faith and reason then, I said, and this comes from St. Augustine way back in the 400s, they're kind of like a pair of scissors. They work together to accomplish a task. The great Pope John Paul II put it this way. I like the poetic nature the way he puts it. He puts it this way. Faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. And God has placed in the human heart a desire to know the truth, in a word, to know God himself, so that by knowing and loving God, men and women may also come to the fullness of truth about themselves. This is known in spiritual formation called double knowledge. The more you get to know God, the more you actually can know yourself, because God knows you better than you know yourself, which is a very, very interesting thing. God is actually closer to us than we are to ourselves. So even faith and reason works in that way in helping us to come to know God and also know ourselves and how we can play a part in God's kingdom. This was from his encyclical letter. I thought was very, very important. So faith and reason can work together. Faith is what? An activity of the will, right? The heart, you might say. Sometimes heart and will are used interchangeably in the Bible. Reason is an activity of the mind. It probes for evidence so that we can put our trust in things. And I think if you keep that model, maybe you can expand on it, deepen it. It'll be very, very helpful to you in the long run. So that way, we use our God-given minds to seek out evidence to trust him more. That may be looking back at the historic miracles that he's done. That may be in direct answers to prayer that currently happen in our lives. And that the definition of hope that I think is biblical is that we look to the past and what God has done in the past, we trust that he will do in the future, right? He's reliable, that we can trust him, right? So take that, let that sit in for a little bit. Let's take a 15-minute break, and we'll apply some of this in some very important areas, including the area of dealing with God and evil and God and suffering. Because a lot of people will say in the light of suffering, well, you just have to have faith. Well, it's hard to have faith in the midst of suffering unless you have some good reasons to do that. And we'll raise some of those. All right? Go ahead, stretch, get a beverage, restroom, whatever you need to do, get the blood flowing.